So we must decide. Do we remain merely a large market subject to the priorities of others? Or do we take the steps necessary to become one power?
That is not an excerpt from a Netflix thriller. No, it is the voice of Mario Draghi, the former president of the European Central Bank and author of what has become the Bible for many policymakers here in Brussels. The Draghi report is telling EU leaders what's at stake for us here in the European Union due to stalling productivity, high energy costs and a huge innovation gap between the US and China. Mario Draghi's calling for an 800 billion injection and deep structural reforms, or
It's do this or it's a slow agony.
Welcome to Brussels, My Love, the podcast with me, Maeve McMahon. Coming up this week, why did EU leaders retreat to a medieval castle in the Belgian countryside for intense talks with Mario Draghi? And why is everyone in Europe talking about this idea of a multi-speed Europe? What does that mean? To answer these questions, I'm joined this week by Vladimir Duli, the president of Eurochambre. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Lovely to have you here. Kate Bolingaro, managing editor Europe at MLEX. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And Nicholas Schmidt, the president of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, former EU Commissioner for Jobs. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you all doing?
Good.
Perfect.
Surviving.
Surviving. Well, look, on that point, surviving, that does seem to be the vibe around Brussels. It really does feel very doomy and gloomy, especially listening there to Mario Draghi. One would think that the EU is literally on the brink of collapse. President Dooley, is that really the case? Are things that bad?
Well, I'm not speaking that we are on the verge of collapsing. This is probably not true. This is still a nice continent to live in. But truth is that we are indeed, and we have been indeed lagging behind in terms of economic growth, productivity, competitiveness behind the main regions. And going back to the quotations from Mario Draghi at the beginning, do we want to become one power? My answer is yes, but we must remove the obstacles which we ourselves implemented on us, be it unnecessary targets of ESG policies, be it too much regulation, be it unwillingness to discern differences in between European Union among different regions and countries, and many other things which just hinder the growth of our productivity and competitiveness. And unless we remove that, and at the same time, unless we deepen the single market, we will never become to be a power which will be at par with the US or China.
Mr. Schmidt, what is your take here? And bear in mind, of course, you're a former commissioner. You were there in the first term of Commissioner von der Leyen, and now things have changed a lot in her second term.
Yes, certainly. The narrative for the program has changed. First, I am relatively optimistic, nevertheless, because if we are talking about gloom, things will be gloomy. And I think we have to show that we still have a way out. And I think the message of Mario Draghi's report is to show that, well, Europe has the possibility to do better. And I take the word of power. Europe didn't really want to be a power. We wanted to be a strong market, a strong economy eventually, but we did not conceive ourselves as a real power. And now we are in a different world, because now it's a world dominated, or at least those who are on the top, they want power to determine everything. And this means that Europe has to wake up, and we have to stand on our own much more, first, security issue, but we have to conceive ourselves as a power. Now, my last word is, you have to read the whole report of Draghi. It's not just about simplification, deregulation, and so on. It's very much about investment, but it's also how Europe should organize. And when he talks about, for the first time after years, well, I think that we should be some kind of pragmatic federalism. That means that Europe has to come closer, that we have to organize differently. And that's, I think, an important message which up to now has not been discussed enough.
And that was the big headline of that informal summit, Kate, that took place just last Thursday in that medieval castle I referred to. There was certainly a sense of urgency in the room.
There was definitely a sort of sense in the room that there was a change in the air, perhaps in terms of the political will to seize the moment of competitiveness. This has been a word. I've been in Brussels for about a decade now. We heard competitiveness and European champions as some of the key phrases in the VDL1 Commission. We were hearing a lot about that now. And it seems like because of having to contend with crisis after crisis in the relationship, with the US, with China, and the world has changed. It's not the same sort of post-Cold War liberal world order that something like the EU thrives in. And that's a narrative that now Europe is having to contend with. And it's really interesting from a journalist perspective to be able to follow that and see whether this is going to be the moment that, Brussels stands up and says, okay, we're ready to become, a powerful player instead of just a market. And, they've relied on soft power for a long time. Are they going to actually shift to hard power? Is this something that the continent's willing to do? Are they ready to do it? And is Ursula von der Leyen going to be pushing that forward? Or is that going to be determined by outside players like someone like Donald Trump, for example, in the United States?
Well, leaders have set the alarm for the March summit. They've set one alarm for the March summit and the other alarm for the June summit. Can you just talk us through this idea of pragmatic federalism? What exactly would that mean?
Well, that means that we have to transfer competences where it is absolutely necessary, where we really know that this would be an added value for Europe. That does not mean that every competences which are national now should be transferred to Brussels. But when we are talking about finance, for instance, the financial markets, well, everybody knows that if we want to win this new competition, economic competition, we have to have a common financial markets. So we have to put together our national, still very national financial markets in one integrated European financial market. This is how federalism functions in the US or in maybe in other federations. And this is what Draghi means. That's the word pragmatic. It does not mean, it's an ideology of federalism. No, it's a pragmatic approach, as we had in some way for the euro. That was a pragmatic approach to put our currencies together and to build the euro.
Of course, I agree with you that Europe needs to invest and Europe needs to invest smartly. But I'm convinced that even if we gather twice as much money as Mario Draghi suggests, unless we do our homework in deregulation, simplification, and many other issues, unless we remove the straitjacket not only from the big companies, but from the millions and millions of small and medium-scale enterprises, I'm convinced that we can plug in twice as much money, and it will not bring such an efficient outcome as we believe. Mario Draghi's report has won a huge contribution. It is the most courageous, deep and perfect analysis after many years. In terms of suggestions, I'm afraid, and this goes to Alden Beeson and elsewhere, I don't want to alleviate our discussion, but you ask for some anecdote. It is who is asking in Hamlet, what are you reading, my prince, Polonius? And the answer of Hamlet is words, words, words. And we are full of words. We need to act, and we need to act in a politically acceptable way. And I am not convinced that the word federalism is the solution. For instance, even in terms of deepening of single market, there will not be a magician solution. There will have to be very technocratic, step-by-step, long-term work, which is going to remove the regulation, and maybe rather a regional approach when some regions like Benelux, like Scandinavia and Baltics, like Central Europe are going to start to remove the obstacles.
Kate, maybe a multi-speed Europe now, this was a taboo topic for a long time, this idea that, was running contrary to the treaties and it was something that was just not going to be possible. The values that, Brussels was, acting together in unity. But I do think that actually, unlocking the savings of Europeans is something that has been over and over said as a way to sort of fund the Draghi report. And I wonder if this is going to be a way and like a test case. There's a lot of speculation if this is going to be a test case for all of the chance that there's countries that want to work together to actually achieve something, a policy goal together, and that this may actually bring other countries to the table, who maybe wouldn't support it. You've got Ireland and Luxembourg that are, holding on to, maintaining that power of regulation.
And Mr. Schmidt, you're of course from Luxembourg.
I'm from Luxembourg, yes. Perhaps I do not share every point of view of a Luxembourgish government on federalism. I know this word because I was at the Maastricht negotiation already. So this F word was the terrible word for the Brits.
Effort.
Yes, it was the F word, terrible word. It was taken out because Kohl was very much insisting on that. He wanted it in. And that was the political vision of Europe. We have lost since. Now it comes back in some other form. And I would say it's not the word which counts. Words, words, words. It's the fact how we work together. And that's why Draghi wanted to provoke. If you know Draghi, he likes also sometimes to provoke. That's why he used it and added another word to the federal. He said pragmatic. Because
which people love. People can swallow that.
Yeah. And that's the point now. If you want to be a power, we have to organize to be a power.
I know Mario Draghi. I was working with him for the same institution for 5 years. We used to sit in the very same room even. Yes, he's like that. As to Maastricht, Mr. Schmidt, I don't have your experience, but since December 89, I have been part of the first non-communist government. I have been called in by late President Havel in the age of 36, crazily young and unexperienced. And I served 8 years first as the economics minister of Czechoslovakia, then of the Czech government till end of 97. That time, my dream was to bring my country back to the European mainstream. But I didn't expect that I'm bringing my country back to the overregulated, with the improper climate change policies, which will be at the end of the day counterproductive even for the climate. I believe that I'm bringing my country back to the democratic European Union with the liberties, with the human rights, with the freedom of speech, and with the market economy, of course, with the social.
But that clearly is the move now inside the Commission. It's about simplification. It's about deregulation. We're hardly hearing a word about the Green Deal.
So this Europe is completely different to what I believe that I want to bring my country in. Today, Europe is definition, characteristica is completely different.
And why do you think that, and who is responsible for that, in your view?
I think the European elites, including the elites in my part, and I was young and naive. I also believed in multiculturalism. I also believed in the Sozialmarktwirtschaft, as the Germans say. It was a wrong approach. I'm sorry to say so. I know it goes against the mainstream of the city. It was a bad approach which makes us responsible, not Donald Trump. It makes us responsible for our problems, and it creates a politically consequences, because I would never vote for AFD's and Le Pen's parties, but they are going to prevail because of our own fault. And Mr. Trump is only describing the reality, despite the fact how I dislike him.
The whole thing started with the internal market, you know. We had to build an internal market. And how did we build it? Partially by trying to have regulation in order to make the internal market functioning, because otherwise it would be the addition of national markets. So this is a point. Europe was created, especially the internal market was created by regulation to make sure that there was a market functioning, because markets are not functioning on themselves. They are functioning because there's a frame. That was the first point, and I think that was a success. Now, the point was, it was not sufficient to say, well, you recognize my regulation and I recognize yours. That would have been the easiest way. It didn't function for everything. So we had to regulate in some kind the way to create this market. Now, a word on competitiveness. You said, well, it's the first time. No, I remember also that Jacques Delors, at the end of his mandate, got a report on competitiveness. So it's not such a new idea. Competitiveness has been around for quite a moment. Now, it has come back strongly. And I agree that we have to look what is needed and what is not needed. I agree. And we have to check that. And perhaps the Green Deal, which I support, because when you look what's happening in France with the floods, what's happening in Portugal with the floods, and so on, you cannot say there is no climate crisis. There is no climate crisis.
I never said that.
No.
Let's be clear. I never said that.
I just talked about Trump and his fellows. So we have to do something. Europe has to give. And the climate issue is also a potential big chance for Europe industry if we seize it. So I think we have to look not only negatively, but positively.
It's all about getting the balance right. But Kate, from your perspective there at MLEX, I guess you are reporting a lot on this whole simplification, deregulation. It's a real turnaround from the previous commission of Ursula von der Leyen.
Well, certainly. So we have seen that is really the new push. First the push was, again, we discussed competitiveness, but also digital regulation, the Green Deal, and now we are seeing this push for simplification. But we're hearing from folks working, on the simplification project is that they don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. They're keen to hold on to the regulation that they are seen as needed, that is supporting, what the EU has been trying to do in terms of creating the internal market, the single market, and also at the same time listening to business that is saying, look, we've been overburdened by regulation. There's rules that contradict, cross over. They're doing the same thing. So I think that there is a big conversation going on right now and soul searching, frankly, in Brussels because of this idea that Europe regulates first and asks questions later sometimes in certain cases.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's a way to do it. And a lot of the folks we talk to within the institutions are saying we're trying to find the way forward to, ensure that our laws are aligned with our values as Europe. So climate change does remain something that a lot of Europeans care about. It's very important. But at the same time, they want to be able to boost that competitiveness and get, more businesses started, for example. This 28th regime that was talked about last week, for example, is something that, would make
the big announcement in Davos. Yeah.
Exactly. This is something that I think that Europe is trying to strike the balance on. And again, its natural state is to regulate. It was built on regulation. It's its natural way of functioning. And so I think it's now trying to find a way to maintain its, regulatory prowess in a sense, but still also listening to the calls of industry to take a look at what regulation is actually needed at the end of the day.
I'd like to just bring in another view, that of Ludovic Vogt. He is the Confederal Secretary at the European Trade Union Confederation, ETUC.
When we heard last week, for example, Bart de Wever's talking about a shock therapy of simplification, or the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, saying that we need a deregulatory mindset, we are clearly aiming, in our view, at the wrong target. Europe's industrial problems are real, but they are not caused by workers' rights or environmental standards. Deregulation will bring very limited economic gains, and this is also seen in the impact assessments. But at the contrary, there's real risk for our protections with the regulatory attack. We think that faced with unfair global competition and economic instability, the European industries clearly need support and workers clearly need protection. And in this regard, the key discussion that should happen at the EU Council should be about a strong investment offensive, an investment mindset, an investment therapy.
Investment therapy. That's one way of putting it. Surely your reaction there, that's the concerns of ETUC, which is the biggest trade union confederation across Europe.
Well, needless to say that I don't agree 100% with what we have just heard.
I didn't expect you to agree.
Definitely
99.
not. Definitely not.
That's why I love bringing different voices together.
Yeah, but listen, of course, it's not only about the regulation, as it is not only about investment. Is a way how to find a proper balance. But coming back to environmental policies and Green Deals, let me reiterate, I'm not questioning the need for the climate change policy. Looking outside the window, I am ardent skier and missing snow, etc., etc. But I am saying that the way how Brussels or how Europe approach the climate change policy with the Green Deals, with too much proudness that we are going to be at the vanguard of the climate change policies, etc. I'm afraid that when we start first to regulate and then to ask questions, at the end of the day, and I said it already today, at the end of the day in 2050, 60, the countries like China, the regions like Southeast Asia, even the US where Trump will not be forever, at the end of the day, because they concentrate more on business, investment into the modern and the green technologies, they will do more for the climate change than we do in Europe if we continue with this very stupid policy. And one thing to come closer to Mr. Schmidt on the single market, we will both probably agree it's not only about quotation Brussels. It's very much on the national government. And it's also, and here I'm talking to my own ranks, it's about the selfishness of national industries, because I would like to deregulate everything. No, but only me. Please protect my business. So we need a complete change of the mindset in Europe, including coming back to the trade unions, including the workers' right. I don't want to have some type Darwinist type capitalism. We need to observe some workers' right. But again, I'm going to say in Europe, since the economic miracle in the 60s, these workers' rights have been exaggerated and are another hindrance in the growth of our productivity.
I agree with one point you mentioned, absolutely. Also, so when you are launching a big enterprise like the Green Deal, which will transform your economy, which will transform your society in some way, then you have to consult before. You have to do that in very close cooperation with all the stakeholders, which means with the unions, yes, with the unions, fair transition, but especially with industry, and say what is possible, what can be done, and not just say, well, that's the rule, that's the objective, now take care and attain it, achieve it. So that was, in my view, not the best way how this was performed.
A lot to digest and unpack there when it comes to the European economy. But I also wanted to ask you all about the Munich Security Conference. We saw the EU Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas. She was on stage, in fact, with our very own Maria Tadeo, Euronews' EU editor. And before the panel with Maria Tadeo, she had a very clear message for the US administration. I would love for you to take a listen, and then I'd like to get your thoughts.
Contrary to what some may say, woke, decadent Europe is not facing civilizational erasure. In fact, people still want to join our club, and not just fellow Europeans. When I was in Canada last year, I was told that over 40% of Canadians have an interest in joining the European Union. So the waiting list is quite long.
So quite an assertive Kaja Kallas there, more self-confident. She grabbed a lot of headlines, Kate Bolingaro, for that speech. Are we seeing a change of tone?
I think there's certainly a change in a sense that we can hear that Europe is not going to necessarily back down as easily as we saw initially with Trump, when the trade agreement that was struck. Now, when it came to Greenland, there was a stronger pushback from Europe saying, look, we're not going to be doing this. And it's something that we've seen, and we talked to folks in Brussels, and they're saying, like, kind of enough is enough. We have shared interests with the United States, and we're going to be, willing to talk about pursuing those shared interests, but we do have divergent values in a sense, and we want to have our own European values that are defined by the Europeans and here in Brussels and also national capitals.
Mr. Draghi, how should Brussels deal with the current US administration?
I don't know. I wouldn't use the words of Mrs. Kallas. But if I ask my friends, top business people, university professors, why on earth did you vote for Trump? Not because of his erratic behavior, they tell me, because we were fed up with the woke democratic culture and politics. So to use the word woke with Europe, I would never say it. But even Europe as United States is now divided. Because we have AfD in Germany, we have Le Pen party there, you have your people here in Holland and elsewhere. I have them at home. They are even in the government, to my horror, now in my country. As there is a division in United States, it's a division in Europe.
Well, I think Mrs. Kallas had some courage to recognize that this ideology of Europe going down the drain is fake news, finally. It's abused by this American administration to dominate Europe because they consider us as a competitor. As Trump said, well, Europe was created just to harm the US, not to say it as brutally as he did. And I think now we have to be aware that we are on ourselves, which does not mean, in my view, that we should cut the relationship with the US. I think there are very good things in the US. We all hope that there will be a change again after perhaps in November, hopefully, and later. But we have to know also that the US will never be the US we knew before, because the world is not the world of before. So I think Europe has now to build its own capacities, economic, I agree. And just to say, I agree that over-regulation is not just Europe, it's very much national. And we do not speak about the national over or bad regulation so much as about the European.
But may I have a short question? You say about the ideology of simplification, deregulation. But wasn't Green Deal and all that madness with ESG in the first commission, wasn't it ideology?
No,
it was an ideology par
I agree.
excellence.
It was ideologized. It is a real issue that we have to transform our economies, that we have to change a bit our behaviors because there's a reality of a climate crisis, but it was perhaps in some area too much ideologized. Here I can join you.
Thank you.
And that's why I think that we should have perhaps approached the whole Green Deal differently. Here we are quite close.
Pity we don't have Franz Timmermans around the table. Maybe we
No,
can get him on
no,
next week.
Thanks God.
Sometimes even between colleagues and party members, there might be some differences.
Final thoughts with you, Kate?
Mr. Schmidt, Mark Carney made this speech in Davos, and Europe is not on its own either. And I think that there is still different countries out there that, have been vocal in the press talking about their wanting for alliances. You've got Canada, you've got the UK also, frankly, coming back to the table, wanting a closer relationship with the EU, signing trade deals with Mercosur and India, and, Australia, New Zealand. Like, there's plenty of places around the world that are still like-minded, maybe some of the vintage way of thinking that we used to see in this pre-Trump 2 era. But I would like to end on a not so bleak note that maybe there is a way to see a positive way forward where, there's, room for different types of views and able to make alliances around the table.
And indeed, Commission President von der Leyen is planning a trip soon to Australia. We also have the EU-UK summit to look forward to in May, so do stay tuned for that. But that does bring this conversation to a close. Vladimir Dooley, the President of Eurochambre, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Kate Bolangaro, Managing Editor of Europe at MLEX, and also Nicholas Schmidt, the President of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. And thank you, of course, so much for tuning in. Do reach out to us here, brusselsmylove@euronews.com. That is our email address. Thank you also to those behind the scenes, our sound technician, George Levaditis, also our Brussels My Love podcast producer, Alice Carnivali, and our social media aide, Rebecca Spinazzo. If you're not already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on euronews.com or on YouTube. And if you like what you hear, subscribe to Brussels My Love, the podcast, leave us a review, give us a rating, and spread the word about Brussels My Love, the podcast. See you next time.
Euronews.